Hello, and welcome to ReallyBigHat. My name is Jared, and welcome to another Commander decklist video. Today I'm going over probably my favorite deck that I've ever built in paper, and that is Don Andres the Renegade. This is a theft deck, but with one major twist. I try to avoid stealing from people's boards or hands as much as possible. The theme of this deck is to play your opponent's decks off the top of their libraries. This has a few interesting implications, which I believe increase the enjoyment of not only yourself, but everyone at the table. By avoiding stealing from the board or people's hands, you are no longer denying them resources when you're playing their cards. And while that isn't the only reason people dislike playing against theft decks, I believe it's a major one, even if most people don't realize it. And by not doing that, you reduce a lot of the salt that could be coming your way. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and look at our commander, Don Andres, how he fits in the deck, and then we'll get to the rest of the profile. Don Andres the Renegade is a legendary creature, vampire pirate. He is a 4/3, and his abilities are as follows. Each creature you control but don't own gets +2/+2, has Menace and Death Touch, and is a pirate in addition to its other types. Additionally, whenever you cast a non-creature spell you don't own, you create 2 tapped treasure tokens. Don Andres is one of those commanders whose entire strategy is pretty much printed right there on the card. He wants to control creatures he doesn't own, he wants to cast spells he doesn't own, he wants to control pirates, and he wants to have treasures. And so those are the 3 major themes of this deck. It has a strong theft engine, and it has pirate and treasure synergies sprinkled within as much as possible. So let's go ahead and start talking about those themes, starting with the most important and the largest one, the theft engine. So I think the first card I have to mention that is included within the theft engine is the one exception to my rule of not stealing from the hand or the board, and that is Insurrection. The reason I've included this is because you only cast this when you're going for game. If you look at the board and notice that the creatures everyone has played, including yourself, have enough power to attack every player for lethal damage, you cast Insurrection and you go for game right there on the spot. However, this is this deck's only built-in win condition. This is the only card that is included in the deck for the express purpose of closing out a game. The reasoning behind that is that I really want this deck to focus on the theme of playing your opponent's deck for them. Rather than building towards your own win condition, I want this deck to focus on the absolute chaotic fun of trying to find a win condition throughout your opponent's decks with the cards you're able to steal from them. Of course, if that isn't your particular cup of tea, I will include some suggestions at the end of the video for some built-in win conditions for yourself to make the deck a little more consistent in its win rate. This deck isn't exactly designed to win games efficiently. In fact, kind of the opposite. It's designed to win games, sure, but only in fun and interesting ways. But that's enough of a side tangent. Let's get back to talking about more of the theft engine. As I said, most of the theme of the theft is to play cards off the top of your opponent's library. To that end, I have some classic cards that you would find in even decks that aren't built around theft, like Ragavan and Etali Primal Storm. These are both some of the more impulsive theft cards, where you're only looking at the top card of your opponent's library, and you either have to play it right now in the case of Etali, or until the end of turn in the case of Ragavan. I have some other cards that fit that theme, such as Laughing Jasper Flint, Grenzo Havoc Raider, and Fallen Shinobi. These are some of the more fun theft cards, in my opinion, because the chaotic nature of only getting a few cards off the top of your opponent's library and having a limited window in which to cast them really adds to the tension of the situation. If you flip over something really spicy, but you have to play it right now, sometimes the timing doesn't quite work out. For example, you could get something that can be cast at instant speed that would be far more helpful on an opponent's turn, but could still get you some value now. Or you could get something really expensive that you can just afford, but won't leave you any mana available for instant speed interaction that you have in your hand for your opponent's turn, such as counterspells. And since you're exiling these cards, everyone gets to see them, so it can lead to some table discussions and some politics of people being like, oh, you should cast this, or, ooh, please don't cast that. It's a really interesting and fun situation. But of course, we do also have some far more reliable theft pieces as well. Cards like Grima, Saruman's Footman, Nicol Bolas, God Pharaoh, and Fevered Suspicion. These cards not only guarantee you something to steal, but they guarantee you can cast it, because you get to cast it without paying its mana cost. These are the more powerful and reliable theft effects that really advance your game state, your board position, and really start to harass your opponents with their own cards. The last type of theft effect I want to talk about is the I'll save that for later type of card. Cards like Siphon Insight, Outrageous Robbery, Gonti, Lord of Luxury, or Tybalt, Cosmic Imposter. These cards give you a stable of cards that you can cast at any later time. And in the case of most of them, they're exiled face down, so your opponents won't even know what's coming. You can think of them as the Mystery Mousecatool. So those are all the different types of cards that are included within the theft engine. But let's keep moving right along and start talking about our pirate subtheme. A lot of the pirate subtheme actually overlaps with the treasure subtheme. So a lot of the pirates, even though they care about pirates specifically, the payoff they get for having said pirates or attacking with them or dealing combat damage with them is treasures. These are cards like Malcolm, Keen-Eyed Navigator, Ramirez de Pietro, Pillager, and Breaches, Eager Pillager. I also have cards like Captain Lannery Storm, and even the controversial Dockside Extortionist. But to be fair, when you're building a deck that cares specifically about pirates and treasures, how can you not include Dockside? So many of these cards care about pirates taking specific game actions, either entering the battlefield, attacking, or dealing damage, and as I said, getting treasures as a reward. This means that not only do the pirates overlap with the treasure subtheme, but they're also a significant portion of the ramp package of this deck in general. And if you have a group of cards that fits into 3 or even 4 categories of your deck, that's what they call efficiency. At this point, I want to talk about some of the more esoteric cards, some of the more unique inclusions, and some of the combos that I run. And right off the bat, I want to talk about one of the more powerful cards you can ever get into play in this deck, and that is Prosper Tomebound. Prosper does several things for this deck. First, he is a little bit of impulse draw. At the beginning of our end step, we exile the top card of our library, and we can play it until the end of our next turn. This is already helpful because we don't run a whole lot of draw spells in this deck. But the real pièce de résistance is Pact Boon. Whenever we play a card from exile, we create a treasure token. So many of our theft effects exile cards in order to cast them, either from the top of your opponent's library or even from other places. Often, part of the theft effect is exiling that card first. This is effectively giving most of our theft effects a mana discount, because when we cast the card that we're stealing, we get a treasure token. Bringing out Prosper early on in a game completely changes the complexion of what you're able to do with your deck. He really takes it from a 9 to a 10 in certain situations. Not power level wise, of course, but just figuratively speaking. But now that I have mentioned power level, that is an interesting element of this deck, in my opinion, is that due to the nature of only packing the one win condition with Insurrection and playing cards off the top of your opponent's deck as your main strategy, that means that you can sit down with most power levels of decks and be exactly competitive with them because you're just playing their deck. If they brought a 7, anything you steal from them is going to be a 7. If they brought an 8, the same. If they brought a 6, the same. Of course, if you get cards like your Prosper and your Dockside into play and start doing some shenanigans with them, you'll go way up on mana and be able to cast more and more of your opponent's cards, which can put you at an advantage against decks that don't pack enough interaction. But generally speaking, since you're trying to win with your opponent's cards, whatever they brought, you're going to have that power level in what you can actually bring to bear to try and win the game. Like, you could bring out your Dockside for 12 or 20 mana, bring out your Prosper and keep exiling cards off the top of your library and getting treasures and discounts, and have all of these theft cards in your hand and all of this mana to cast them. But if all that you're stealing from your opponent is a bunch of, like, 3/3s with no keywords, what have you really accomplished, you know? You're still likely to win that matchup against them because now you have all of their 3/3s. Like, if that's their strategy and you have it now, you're still going to win. But you're matching their power level. You're hitting them with their own deck, whatever that may include. So if they have a bunch of low power cards, that's what you're stealing from them. To further that, if you're sitting at a table with varied power levels, like if somebody is playing a slightly modified precon on one end, somebody's playing a strong 7, something mid-power and pretty efficient in the middle, and then someone else is playing something a little high power, you know, maybe even degenerate, you can actually sit this deck down at that table and act as a sort of stabilizing force. Because if you focus all of the high power players' high power cards back against them, they have to focus on you instead of curb stomping the rest of the table, because now you're the threat to them. And once they're dealt with, you won't have their high power cards to deal with the mid power or the modified precon. You'll only have what you can take from them to deal with those two players. So it somewhat acts as a self-balancing force at a varied power level table to run a deck like this. It's a pretty interesting benefit that you get from running this type of strategy. And honestly, that can be one of the best things you could do to increase everyone's fun. The high power player is going to get a worthy opponent in you because you're reflecting their own power back at them. But the mid and lower power players are going to be able to just kind of dirtle, do their deck's thing, and you won't be able to disrupt them that much because you're only using what they have back against them as well. So that's just a really interesting thing to consider if you're trying to play this kind of a deck. You get the benefit of being a stabilizing force at whatever table you sit down at, and that can really help increase the fun. But enough of that touchy-feely stuff. Let's talk about some of the combos that are going to make the other players at the table hate your guts. So I've already mentioned the fact that Prosper combos with most of your theft cards by giving you a treasure as a discount. But I've also mentioned that I'm running Dockside Extortionist. And I would like to say that these cards I'm about to mention double down on what Dockside is already doing, but actually, in several cases, they triple or quadruple down on him, and you'll see what I mean here in a second. So the first one I want to mention that combos with Dockside is a tutor for him, and that is Muddle the Mixture. So this has two different things it can do. You can either pay 2 blue mana to counter a target instant or sorcery spell, so it is a counter spell in your back pocket if you need, but it also has Transmute. You can pay 1 and 2 blue to discard this card, search your library for a card with the same mana value as this card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. You can do that at sorcery speed only. This is a 2 mana card. Dockside is a 2 mana card. So if you have this in your hand, it is just as good as having Dockside in your hand, because you can search him right up. And just to add to the fun, I'm also running several clone effects, and Dockside is a really good target for any type of clone effect, because it is a non-legendary creature, and you're going to get his ETB again when you clone him. And yeah, so I do have Pirated Copy, which is on theme. You can have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except that creature is a pirate in addition to its other types, and it also gains the ability that whenever that creature or another creature with the same name deals combat damage, you can draw a card. You probably won't be getting that second benefit if you're copying Dockside, but copies are flexible. You can copy anything. If there's a potent offensive threat that is doing a lot of combat damage, you can have Pirated Copy come in as your own version of it, and whenever either of them deals combat damage, you get a card out of it. I'm also running Phyrexian Metamorph that can copy Dockside as well, but the premier copy spell for Dockside specifically is Endless Evil. This is an enchantment, aura, where you can enchant a creature you control, and at the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that's a copy of it, except the token is a 1/1. That is a Dockside entering the battlefield every single upkeep, as long as this is attached to him. I really don't think I need to spell out how ridiculous that is. You're going to be getting Dockside's enter the battlefield effect and making a boatload of treasures every single one of your upkeeps. That is just ridiculous. But that combo is generally as degenerate as this deck gets. And like I mentioned earlier, you can have all the mana in the world. If you have nothing to cast with it, it's not really going to be doing you that much good. It'll make you seem like the threat for days, and everybody is going to be gunning for you, which is definitely something to keep in mind if you don't think you have an advantage to get out of it. You might not want to make that play if you don't need to. But while we're on the topic of the mean things you can do to the table, I do want to talk about a couple of the board wipes that I have that are on theme. First up is, of course, Blood Money. You can destroy all creatures. For each non-token creature destroyed this way, you get a tapped treasure token. So it mostly pays for itself, but not until your next turn comes around, because you have to untap the treasures in order to tap and sacrifice them for mana. But the other board wipe that I have that is very on theme is Heartless Conscription. You exile all creatures, and for each card exiled this way, you can play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and mana of any type can be spent to cast it. That means it pairs incredibly well with the rest of your Theft engine. Anything that you just board wiped with Heartless Conscription, you can replay. Like, that is pretty crazy. Especially if you consider that if you're able to bring Don Andres back out, any creature you play from that you don't own gets +2/+2, Menace, and Death Touch. And it's a pirate, just in case that matters. So the last thing to go over are some of the other options I have for game-winning plays that you could include in this deck, like I promised earlier, to increase the efficiency of your win percentage. I won't go too in-depth into any of these, but I will mention them here. The most on-brand card you can include that would increase your win percentage is Revel in Riches. This allows you to turn all the treasures you're generating from your pirates into a win condition in and of itself. Other than that, you are in the colors to do the Kiki Jiki Pestermite play. Just bring out an infinite number of flyers and just swing for game. Or if you wanted to stay a little bit more on theme, you could also pair Kiki Jiki with Time Stream Navigator to take an infinite number of extra turns. But that should just about wrap up everything that I really need to cover about this deck. Like I said at the beginning, this is probably my favorite deck that I've ever built in paper. This deck enables you to make a lot of very fun plays. All of the game actions you're taking that are in your theme involve playing your opponent's cards. So that's a lot of built-in variety right there, which means you're very unlikely to ever get bored of playing a deck like this. And like I mentioned earlier, this deck is very flexible in the power levels it can fairly play with as well. You can sit this deck down at a table that's playing anything from modified precons all the way up to high power casual, and you won't be too overpowered or underpowered to play in any of those pods. If you're interested in building this deck yourself, I will of course link to the deck list on Archidekt in the description, but I'll go ahead and sign off here. I will say I will see you guys next time. Later!